It's not a satellite and it's not a meteor. No,
Yeah, these things are not moving like meteors. They're looks like they're orbiting.
Hello and welcome to the Enigma Sighting Show. This is a new show by Enigma Labs, and I'll be hosting it. My name is Alejandro Rojas, and I am the head of content and research at Enigma. At Enigma, we're building an app and a database to collect sighting reports, historical sighting reports from data sets, some of which you may have heard of, some of which you haven't. And then also new sightings. And we're bringing together as many reports as possible. Right now, we've got hundreds of thousands, and we want more because the more data we have, the more scientists will be able to, and researchers will be able to analyze these reports and figure something out about UAP. So we'll be talking more about our product and what we're working on throughout this show and future shows, especially as they pertain to helping in the research. But we will mostly be focusing on the sightings themselves. We'll be covering some of the historical sightings that are very important, and we'll be bringing in some of the top researchers to talk about those sightings. If you want to read about those sightings, we got an amazing database, a knowledge base at enigmalabs.io. You see the URL right there where you'll be able to look at those. We also have, some blogs and other information about Enigma that you'll be able to look at there as well right now, as we get ready to eventually launch our app, publicly. Right now, we are taking sighting reports, so do go to that website and submit your reports, and then we are checking out those reports, and some of those reports, we'll be inviting people to come tell us about their sightings on the show. So I'm very excited about this show. And I'm very excited about our first guest because you probably have seen a lot of UAP reports in the news, particularly pilot reports, commercial pilots, and others. And there's one research in particular who's kind of been the focus of all of this, and that is Ben Hansen. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Alejandro. How's it going?
Good. So Ben is a longtime UAP researcher. And first tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I'm involved in a lot of different things. The UAP UFO subject was something that interested me when I was like 8 years old, and started reading the books on it. And, I got really nerdy into looking up back when they had actual physical newspapers. I would take the clippings out and save everything I could in a little folder. And now, of course, we have the internet, which makes that easier. But from a young age, I was also very interested in flying and anything to do with space, like a lot of people are. A kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, sort of. And so from there, when I was 14 years old, I started trying to decide what I wanted to do for a career. And for a moment there, I actually wanted to be a commercial pilot. When I was 14 years old, I started taking flying lessons, and I think you have some kind of footage of
got some footage here of you flying.
No, this is when I went and got my my seaplane rating, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot different than flying on land. It's just in the way, of course, you take off and land and the things that you're concerned about. But I've kept it as a hobby, and over the years, I've now started to get into helicopters, and I'm just a little shy of the hours I need to get my commercial license. So it's been a hobby of mine that I've really enjoyed. And, along with that is this fascination of things in the sky. Right. And so I have this tie into the aviation community, and, like in college, my degree and all that stuff was primarily in law enforcement. Worked for a time, doing investigations at state and federal levels. But now, I'm heavily involved in this UAP research. And as you had mentioned, there's been a lot of reports by pilots, right? And it really kind of presented an opportunity for me to fall into this niche because I felt like they knew and trusted, you know what, here I am just getting ready to take off.
Yeah,
It's
I
so
want to show the audience that
fun.
you were able to actually get off the ground here. And I love it because you look a little nervous before you get out of the water, but as soon as you get out of the water, you can tell you're like, oh, I got this. Now
Well,
I'm
the
all
thing
good.
about seaplanes too is that they take off when they want. You
Hmm.
know, it's counterintuitive. If you pull back on the yoke too soon, you end up plowing. You know, like if you snowboarded before, or like more a better analogy is if you've ever wakeboarded, right? When you're getting pulled by that rope, if you dig in your heel too hard, you'll just plow in the water. And it's the same thing with a seaplane. It's like you pull off too hard, and you're just gonna plow, but you got to plane out, and the plane says, "Look, I'm ready to go when I'm ready to go." So there, I lost you for a minute there. So it's so fun. I've kept it as a hobby, but being that I know the commercial flight world and I know everything as I'm working towards that license, you get to talking to a lot of pilots, and there's
Is
some
that how
really
this came about? Just pilots talking to you about their sightings, and how
sort
did
of.
they come to you?
Sort of. I mean, they didn't know that I was a pilot at first. I was actually speaking at it was a public event, a small little thing, and I was talking about UFOs, cryptids, other things that I research. And the guy came up to me after, and he's like, "Hey, I got a guy that I know who's in the Navy, and he recently had this incredible UAP sighting. Do you want to talk to him?" And I was busy, and I'll admit, you know, it's like I get all these, you know, like reports all the time, and they usually amount to really nothing. I said, "Sure, you know, give me his number." And over the weekend, I gave this guy a cold call. It turns out he's a former F-18 pilot, and it started to sound a lot like, you know, Nimitz. He would tell me about how he would go on these intercept sorties, you know, when he was out on the eastern seaboard, and actually several times tried to intercept, you know, UAPs, and they get close to him and they just take off. Well,
Wow.
now he's in the civilian world, and he's flying uh, a Gulfstream, you know, and for a private client, and he had this incredible sighting, and that's kind of how it all took off, and the media
Mhm.
storm and everything surrounding it.
Wow. And, what you described there with them kind of coming in and the objects running off or taking off at quick speed seems to be really, really common for military cases. We've got a great, set of military cases on the website in our knowledge base, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of repeated over and over again. And you mentioned the Nimitz, and for those who might not be familiar with this topic, and you're just tuning in, the Nimitz case was a 2004 case where essentially, the pilots were scrambled to go check out these anomalous readings that they were seeing on radar. They get there, they see a large tic tac shaped object. They even engage it for a sec before it races off very quickly. This was featured in a 2017 New York Times article, and that's really kind of what made all this explode. That caused this interest in this topic, and now many of those Navy pilots have come forward and have briefed the Congress. And I think really that's been a lot of the impetus for Congress to say, hey, wow, they're very impressed by the briefings they've received from these Navy pilots, and now they want something done about it, and they're asking the Pentagon to do something.
Well, yeah, historically, it's honestly, pilots have been the center of it from the beginning. I mean, look at Kenneth Arnold. I mean, that was 1947. He was a civilian pilot, and he reported these things that he described as saucer shaped, right? And from there, you had pilots involved, with Roswell a little bit, but it was mostly like 1950s, 52. You had the red alert DC flyovers where they scrambled jets to chase these things that were hovering over the Capitol building and the White House. And so think about it, pilots. There's a couple reasons why I think people give more credibility to pilots. And number one is that they're up there for thousands of hours looking at nothing more than the sky, especially today where you can set your autopilot, dial it all in. Quite honestly, if you were in the cockpit and in most of these flights, you'd be surprised how bored they are. because all I got to do is sit there and chat. Some of them are watching movies. They can actually even sleep. This is a secret, but airlines allow the pilots to take turns sleeping. And you're like, oh, I'd freak out. My pilot's sleeping. Well, one of them's always awake, but there's nothing to do but look at the sky, right? And occasionally check your instruments. And so they're very well versed in what belongs in the sky and what doesn't, right? And they're very good, we should say better than the average person by far, in my opinion, at judging distances, altitudes, speeds. And so I think one reason that these Navy videos really took off, so to speak, was because not only did you have footage, but government trained and the top guns, literally, in the world, and they're describing things that are physical. They're trying to catch up to them. They can't, and we have evidence of it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the sightings that you received, and I believe that first one, how did it get so famous? It got covered, and then all of a sudden you got swamped with pilot cases, pilots contacting you. Is that how it worked out?
Yeah. So I decided to take this case on because it was unusual enough that no one knew what they're looking at. Air traffic controllers had no idea. And we thought it was sort of like an isolated one thing that multiple airlines had seen over this one night. And so when I released that first report, that's where it snowballed, because all of a sudden we had literally, I think we've talked to maybe 30 pilots directly involved in over 60 or more different commercial flights easily. And with each of those flights, you have more than one pilot, air crew, flight attendants. We have hundreds and hundreds of witnesses. And so that's what snowballed, because they're all seeing what seems to be the same phenomena, with the exception of what I call outlier cases, because through all of this, I call it crowdsourced, investigating. We were able to get videos, we're able to get ATC radar and radio chatter, and got a better picture of what's going on. And we do think, that we found some reasonable explanations for most of these, but the added benefit was just getting the news out that pilots are seeing stuff.
Right.
And even not on this same type of phenomena, they're seeing things they haven't talked about yet, and they're coming forward. And so that's kind of how, we got embedded in the aviation community.
Yeah. So let's watch a video, which I think seems, first of all, it's a video taken by a pilot. Maybe you could set this up a little. I think this is
over the Pacific Ocean. That was a Hawaiian flight, United. I think we had FedEx in there, and this was over the past summer in 2022. And they have so many reports, especially these trans-Pacific or transatlantic flights that go over, and usually they're seen towards the north. And what you were seeing there are these lights that seem to revolve. They get really, really bright and then dim out, and they seem to be turning and coming back behind each other and doing this over and over.
Yeah, let's watch this.
Okay, there it is. And there, barely see it. Oh, dang it, went away.
Right there. Yeah, we got it. And is your position currently between pivot and flight? We're actually up on the Zulu track.
So everybody's seeing it.
Yeah, we eastbound on the Zulu track, just about 80 miles out of Zulu, but yeah, we see it. Yeah, we're at the 330 right over Simmons. Yeah, we're looking at it. We're right behind Civic. Can you give me a clock code where we should be looking? I know at pretty much 9 o'clock. We're at the lower right-hand corner of the next part of the device, the lower right-hand corner of the comes up the Big Dipper is where it's been hanging out. United 534, we're 30 miles west of Civic. 320 at 20 degrees north of the horizon, and it's probably
Oh yeah, there is.
It's either the SpaceX satellites or maybe it's the Perseus. There's a Perseus meter tower this week. Looks like they're orbiting every now and then and changing direction. We concur.
And so you dubbed them the racetrack for that. In fact, I'll play a video here. There's no sound, so we can talk while the video is playing. That one you couldn't really see the video, but you could see the description. And this one, you can see what the video looks like better. And just for people who know, we'll put a link down here. But Ben has done videos that are full analysis of these cases that you can watch on his YouTube. So these are just samples, but we'll play this one here and look up in the upper left. That's where you'll see the first one. And I did make this shorter. So you'll see these objects, and then there's a couple minutes that pass between each time that you see them over again. And
so
that looks like here.
It starts to appear. This was over Missouri, and they get super, super bright. And this is why nearly every pilot says these aren't satellites, is because you can see how they're used to seeing satellite flares, but these things only appear like in a specific little region. This one has a kind of a bluish tint to it. And there's two there. And then there's a moment also in this footage where there's three, and it's hard to tell if they're actually, like one solid craft or that they were, three different objects.
And now it seems that the majority of these sightings, and you can tell me whether you believe this one to be of that actually these are Starlink, that Starlink from the air just look very strange, these trains of satellites from SpaceX.
Yeah, and why? Because we're used to seeing Starlink as it's being launched. And so when people think Starlink, you think of those long pearl-like strings, and people say, well, it's not that. Well, these also seem to change direction, because here they're going left to right, and then some people will say that they're going right to left, and we have lots of footage of that. And it took us a while because nobody at SpaceX has answered us. Nobody with any government agency has told us, hey, we know what these are, and they're not telling the pilots or controllers. And so we've had to figure this out on our own. And what we found was that a lot of these new orbits, as the Starlinks put into orbit, are doing a polar orbit. And the reason they do that is they've got this mesh net basically of coverage, and so it's unusual, but they'll put them going either north to south or south to north, nearly retrograde, we call it, like going backwards. And what happens then is when you get towards especially the polar region, the sun hits at this perfect angle, and they're highly reflective. You can just go look and see online and see how Elon Musk has had a lot of problems trying to find a solution to lower, they call the albedo, okay, the luminosity of these things, because they're like a shiny Corvette, and they put different things on them to try and visors and stuff to make them more dim, but it's not working. And so that's another reason pilots are not used to seeing such really bright objects and going in weird patterns.
Mm-hmm. And for people who don't know, the Starlink satellites are just these strings of satellites that are being launched. They're very small. They're in a very low orbit. I believe that they're made to just burn up in the atmosphere over a period of time. I'm not sure how long their life is. Maybe you do. But they're being dropped like crazy up there so that they can provide internet throughout the world.
Yeah, there's over 3,000 of them right now, and I think the goal, they've had permits to eventually have over 20,000, if I'm not mistaken. So it makes astronomy hard because it's messing up, photos that astronomers are trying to take. A lot of different problems with it, for the benefit of having internet, for the world. But that aside, one of the things with the pilots is that because no one's informing them of this, they're looking at the skies more, but there's also this thing we call the outliers, right? And the people are not only reporting they're seeing these satellites that we can describe their motion might look a little elliptical, but we're also seeing things that cannot be a conventional satellite, because very credible witnesses telling us that some of these objects are pausing and then shooting down at like light speed towards the ocean. They're taking 90-degree turns. Granted, we're looking for footage of someone capturing this because it's not often that this happens coinciding with these, Starlink events.
Mm-hmm. So the racetrack, though, I wanted to get back you were taking a little bit of heat on some of these cases where people came to quick conclusions that in some cases turned out to be right, but they're like, what has Ben doing? This has already been figured out. And I think people don't understand the investigative process. Like you may suspect it's something, but that doesn't mean it is. You still have to go do the work, the due diligence to determine if that's the case or not, right?
Absolutely. Everybody loves a mystery, and they seem to kind of choose sides. And so they'll say, in their mind, they're like, we want this to be anomalous, mysterious. We don't want it to have an explanation, some people say. And the others on the other side, whether they call themselves skeptics or debunkers, say it can't be. And therefore, I'm going to come up with any explanation, whether I put in actual effort or not. And so somewhere in between there, you have reason in the scientific method, which says, look, there's hypotheses, but because we are, quote unquote, citizen researchers, we are not funded. We don't have the resources the government does, but the government's not doing it. So, we volunteer our time, and it takes, I don't know, in this particular case, we easily hundreds of hours of interviewing people, getting the footage, going over it. And it's not something that you can just simply say, I know what it is easily. Well, okay, with that, then if that is your hypothesis, needs proof as well, right? And that's all we're saying. We honestly don't have an agenda in it. And that's what's frustrating, because people try to assign agendas. And I'm like, I don't care if it turns out to be satellites, because then we put that in our inventory of known objects, right? That's really important, because what that means is the next time something like this happens, we can say, well, it is very similar to what we now know as this. And if we can eliminate those, then we can focus our attention and time on the things that are truly anomalous. And we get to, I guess you could say, better, the gold. And if we end explaining all of them, well, fine. But there's some really strange stuff out there that has yet to be explained.
And, one of the other things that seems to have happened in the past that hopefully will be changing, certainly the environment has changed in the military, where they've been asked to report UAP now, is that when people get shy to report these sort of things, like these racetrack phenomena that you've identified, then we don't do the work to figure out, what's affecting these pilots, what these things really are, so that we can help them with safety or other issues related to that. So now here we are, the UAP researchers, with an understanding of what the commercial pilots are seeing, yet, we don't have anything from the FAA or otherwise that have looked into this at all, which is certainly something they will need to, and they probably will in time. And I think we've seen this in the past with the military, even with that video that we saw in the hearings, where they showed a video of these lights that it was a leaked video prior to them showing it, and they were triangular shaped, and they were off of a destroyer or a battleship and some Navy ship. Later, it turned out that they were drones, or at least that's what they believed them to be, which seems to be accurate. But otherwise they would have blown that off as, UAPs, we're not going to listen to that. But now they've investigated, and now we have this issue with these drones. So, this kind of turning the other cheek kind of thing is not really a safe way to go about this. It's kind of like something gets labeled UAP, and all of a sudden everybody's kind of, that's silly, let's go ignore that.
There's a lot of significance in the labels we place on things, and there's a lot of weight that comes with that. And so if you don't know and you can't prove what something is, then it is a UAP by definition, right? And that's the starting point. I think, like you said, the problem is we need to disassociate the emotional investment in, kind of like supporting and whatever, our idea and our theory, and will be crushed if it's not that. Who cares? If we want the truth, right, then the facts will lead us where they're going to lead us. And that's what we try to emphasize, is that we do need to acknowledge when other people have great theories that test out to be that way. But we also need to not have the opposite, the opposite, what we call normalcy bias, where you say, well, no, it's got to be this because it's not possible that it's not, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, yeah, it's very difficult, because within this, middle ground, we're trying to explain to people that there's something strange, and we're trying to identify it. Maybe we, like the public's help, let's reserve our conclusions. Great analogy, criminal investigation, right? If you have, a horrible, shooting or some murder, the sheriff doesn't come out and tell the press every single day, the next thing that's happening and this and that and that. They try to keep them informed, but those investigations can take months, if not years. And some of these that are so big, we shouldn't ourselves either jump to conclusions until we can prove it one way or another with a reasonable probability.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's what's great. What's the benefit of doing this kind of research is that now, where this kind of phenomena that we've labeled the racetrack phenomena that we know has to do with these SpaceX satellites, these Starlink, without having discovered this, it might have been turned into, which often happens, kind of this mythology that pilots are seeing UFOs all over the place and something's going on. There's some kind of invasion. Whereas now we've kind of cut the potential conspiracies that happen, because now we know what they are, which is also really helpful. I think that's one advantage from that this UAP research is being taken so seriously, that we're going to make a lot of discoveries like this, which is great. And people will be paying attention more to what's out there, because certainly there's a lot of what people are not being able to identify that are mundane, that are nothing that extraordinary. However, like you said, these outlier cases, you have ran across some cases that do seem to be pretty strange. Maybe you can describe some of those to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point, it's very important that we don't make our witnesses, in this case, the pilots, the aviators, the flight attendants, the crews, that we don't make them feel stupid for reporting, right? If you can only begin there and say, perhaps they know a little bit more about the sky than the average person. Start there. That they've seen things and they know what belongs in the sky and doesn't. Yes, they're human. But if we continue to ridicule and belittle and say you're stupid, that you can't tell a satellite, right? And make remarks like that, they're not going to come out and report this stuff. And so when we have outlier cases where, I described objects will stop and then shoot down to the water, or anything that a pilot, if they hear that the last guy who reported it was threatened by their company, of coming forward, which has happened. More than one pilot, as we're talking to them, their company said, don't come out and talk about that. And the ironic thing is, they could take footage of something in the sky from their cockpit of a satellite, a known satellite. They could go on social media the next day and say, look at the cool satellite we filmed. No one would say anything. But the minute they say, look at this strange UAP, what is it? All of a sudden they have their chief flight officer and they have HR coming down on them and saying, take that down. Why are you doing this? We're going to discipline you. And so it's this double standard that we got to be careful not to, no pun intended, but alienate our witnesses and make them feel like they can't come forward, because the gold, the true stuff that they're seeing, we're just now breaching and opening up that door to let them say it's okay. And now we're getting cases from decades ago where they're like, I didn't feel like I could talk about this before, but I saw 3 huge saucer-shaped craft come out from under the water while I was flying, And so those are the types of reports that we're getting, and this network that we have now with the pilots. They're like, look, I don't care if you explain this one as satellites. I like that you guys will give it a fair chance. You look at it from all angles, and I trust you, and I'm going to come back to you if I see something again.
Yep. So you now have, because you're starting to get so many of these sightings, we've kind of been working together, and now you're forwarding or having people submit their sightings with Enigma so we could get those to you to do your research. How many sightings are you getting? Like, how it sounds like you have really been inundated.
The reports that I get, they come through my social media channels. I've been directing people towards Enigma. If people want me specifically to look at it, you go to that enigmalabs.io and then / Ben Hansen. And those come to me directly so that I can then go and say, okay, look, this one, it goes to the top of the stack. I need to call this person. This is very unusual. Not everyone gets a call back, but everyone's information is important. And I would say we have right now, I'm just guessing, I probably get about maybe 30 or so per week easily from different, and then when something big happens, it could be, like 50 to 100. And it's overwhelming. And that's another reason that I'm very grateful that Enigma is there to help manage this. We have other eyes on it so we don't miss something really big.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I think we're pretty much out of time. We want to keep these about a half hour each show, so we can bring them to you more often. And next show, we're going to bring Ben back, and we're going to talk more about kind of some of these struggles that pilots have had historically in reporting, some of the stories about that Ben kind of touched upon a bit on how they're discouraged from reporting some of these things. And we'll bring some examples and talk about, solutions and how we move forward. And the good thing is, there was a big NASA event that's been reported, and they were collecting some information, and the FAA was there. So I think that all the agencies are starting to fall in line and figure out, what do we do? How do we turn this around? So the outlook is very positive. I think the future looks very positive.
It's all good stuff. And if you're interested in knowing how this works and what happens when a pilot reports something, where does it go? That's what we'll talk about next.
Yep. So we'll be back with Ben. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I hope to see you back next time.
All right. We'll see you later.